When a congressman looks straight at the FBI director and reads out a list that includes billionaires, a royal prince, a rock star, and even a magician, and the director freezes, you know something's being protected. It wasn't a conspiracy theory whispered online. It was on the record in a government hearing in broad daylight, and what followed exposed just how deep the silence around Jeffrey Epstein's connections still runs. The room went still as Representative Thomas Massie's voice cut through the air. He wasn't dealing in speculation. He was reading from official FBI documents, FD's 302S, records of interviews with Epstein's victims.
This is Judge Engelmeyer's decision from August in U.S. versus Epstein, stating the government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files dwarfs the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials.
Without objection, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, I watched some of your Senate hearing yesterday when Senator Kennedy asked you, you've seen most of the files, who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these women to besides himself? You replied, according to the transcript, there is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else. You also said somewhere in the hearing and here today that the problem is that the case files are constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007 and that the non-prosecution agreement hamstrung future investigations. Those constraints only apply to Southern District of Florida. They do not apply to Southern District of New York, the location of the 2019 sex trafficking indictment, which produced many things, including a series of FD 302 documents. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI in that investigation, these documents in FBI possession, your possession, detail at least 20 men, including Mr. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays Bank, who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims to, victims including minors, such as Virginia Roberts Giuffre, may she rest in peace. That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. We know these people exist in the FBI files, the files that you control. I don't know exactly who they are, but the FBI does. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people, and have you seen these 302 documents?
Sir, I have asked my FBI agents to review the entirety of the Epstein files and bring forth any credible information. And we're working with Congress not only to divulge that information and produce it to you, but any investigations that arise from any credible investigation will be brought. There have been no new materials brought to me launching a new indictment.
So is the loophole here, or is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible, that the 302s maybe didn't produce credible statements that rise to a probable cause?
It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of two different United States attorneys' offices from 3 separate administrations who investigated those same materials in lifetime.
Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession?
They reviewed all that, yes, sir.
And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said
I named one today.
I said we are not in the practice at the Department of Justice and FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing incredible information. That's not what we do. But multiple authorities have looked at the entirety of what we have.
Okay, I got to move on here. Were you present when the AG had the White House event when she released the binders to the social media influencers?
I was, yes.
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information.
Will you personally meet with them?
The FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will.
Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents to the Oversight Committee on the day of my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files?
I don't know what day that was, so no.
Well, they were released that day, and there were victims' names who weren't redacted because they were in such a rush, and the victims are not happy about that. Have you investigated any of the CIA connections? Have you seen the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? And if you wanted to see it, would they show it to you?
Well, I can speak for the FBI, and that's presuming there's a CIA case file, and I've reviewed everything that the interagency, not I, the FBI, that was provided to us.
Would you be willing to look at the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein?
If there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over to the FBI will look at any new investigative leads.
Have you made any progress on the pipe bomb investigation January 6th? And have you made any progress on the motive of the Las Vegas shooter?
As to the first, it's an ongoing investigation, and we have made progress. As to the second, sir, I'll have to get back to you.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous
Gentleman
consent
yields back.
request.
Unanimous consent request from the gentleman from New York.
I ask unanimous consent to introduce an unsigned memorandum from July 7, 2025 that says we did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties with the insignia of the Department of Justice and the FBI.
Without objection.
According to those documents, at least 20 powerful men were named. One was Jess Staley, the former CEO of Barclays Bank. Others included a royal prince, a Hollywood producer worth hundreds of millions, a high-profile musician, and several billionaires, including one from Canada. These weren't rumors. These were victim statements sitting in FBI files. And yet when Massie asked who Epstein trafficked his victims to besides himself, the FBI director hesitated. Patel, the man now leading the bureau, didn't deny the existence of the files. He didn't even deny that those names were there. Instead, he took a slow breath and said there is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else. The room stirred. You could almost hear the disbelief ripple across the chamber. Massie pushed again. Had Patel reviewed those files? Patel admitted he hadn't personally seen them. That's when it hit everyone watching. He wasn't saying the evidence didn't exist. He was saying he hadn't looked at it. But that wasn't the whole story. Patel tried to redirect, claiming the investigations were constrained by old search warrants from 2006 to 2007. He said earlier probes under 3 administrations found no credible evidence. Massie didn't let go. He reminded him that those limitations only applied to the Southern District of Florida, not the 2019 case in New York, which produced the newer FD 302S. These weren't outdated documents. These were victim statements collected after Epstein's 2019 arrest, the kind of evidence that should have sparked new investigations, yet nothing happened. When power shields power, silence becomes the loudest answer. Massie pressed further. So is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible? Patel tried to dance around it. It's not my assertion, he said. It's the assertion of multiple U.S. attorneys' offices who investigated those same materials. Think about that. He didn't defend the victims, and he didn't own the conclusion. He just passed the responsibility down the bureaucratic chain where truth goes to disappear. And then came the part that made everyone watching question the entire system. Massie asked Patel if he'd meet with Epstein's victims. After all, the Bureau had no problem meeting with social media influencers to promote their transparency. Patel hesitated again. He said the FBI will meet with anyone who has new information. Massie pressed, will you personally meet with them? Patel's answer was a dodge. The FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will. That's the thing about institutional power, it hides behind language. Every word designed to sound cooperative while meaning nothing. But Massie wasn't done. He turned the spotlight to something even darker, the intelligence connection. He read out 4 documents for the record, including one where former Labor Secretary Alex Acosta admitted he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Another article revealed Epstein's private calendar listing meetings with Obama administration officials and the former CIA chief. A Wall Street Journal piece described 36 meetings between Epstein and former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who once led Israel's military intelligence. These weren't internet rumors, they were documented mainstream reports. And when those words hit the room, Epstein belonged to intelligence, it changed everything. Suddenly the case didn't sound like a criminal investigation gone cold. It sounded like something that had been deliberately buried. Patel tried to stay composed, but the cracks showed. When asked if he'd seen the CIA file on Epstein, he replied carefully, "That's presuming there's a CIA file." He added that he'd reviewed what the interagency provided, which meant yes, there was information being shared behind closed doors. But he wouldn't confirm what it was. He wouldn't even confirm if he'd asked to see more. For the head of the FBI, that kind of restraint didn't look like professionalism. It looked like fear. And it's not just fear of what's inside those files, it's fear of what exposing them would mean. For years the Epstein story has been wrapped in secrecy, files sealed, names redacted, deals made, a network of influence that stretched from Wall Street to Buckingham Palace. Victims were silenced, journalists intimidated, and powerful men quietly erased from the narrative. Each time someone tried to pull the curtain back, the system responded with the same line, ongoing investigation. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Ongoing investigation has become Washington's most convenient graveyard. It buries accountability under paperwork, letting time do the rest. In this hearing you could see that process play out in real time. A congressman listed names from official FBI evidence, 20 powerful men accused by victims. And the FBI director's defense wasn't that it was false. It was that the system had already decided not to look deeper. The Bureau had reviewed it. The DOJ had concluded it. Multiple administrations had agreed. In other words, the people being questioned about their failures were the same ones tasked with investigating them. That's not justice. That's circular protection. There's a quote from one of Epstein's bodyguards that resurfaced in this hearing. He had connections with the CIA. It sounds like fiction, but when you see the pattern it stops feeling far-fetched. Epstein's private jets, his mysterious wealth, his ties to intelligence-linked figures in the US, Israel, and beyond. You start realizing the story was never about one man's crimes, it was about how those crimes were protected. And that brings us back to Patel, because when he said I haven't personally reviewed those documents, what he really revealed was a strategy. Distance equals deniability. If he never reads them, he can't be accused of covering them up. It's the perfect shield. One that's been used again and again in Washington when the truth becomes inconvenient. The victims' names, those who came forward, those who risked everything to speak, were left buried in classified files. Yet the Bureau somehow found time to release binders to social media influencers during a White House event, supposedly to increase transparency. According to reports, those binders included victims' names that weren't even redacted, because the release was rushed for optics. Victims furious, predators untouched. That's not transparency, it's exploitation. And still no one held accountable. Because here's the pattern, when the powerful are involved, investigations stall, documents get sealed. Credibility becomes a weapon. A victim accuses a billionaire, the system quietly labels her story, not credible. But who decides what's credible? The same people being accused. It's a cycle designed to protect the top and exhaust everyone else. Patel's testimony fits that pattern perfectly. He admits there are thousands of pages of Epstein files. He admits victims named names. But he insists multiple agencies already reviewed everything and found nothing new. That's the bureaucratic translation of "we're done looking." And when pressed, he repeats it. No new materials brought to me, launching a new indictment. A clean, careful phrase, legal, lifeless, and hollow. That's how truth dies in a system built to manage outrage instead of solve it. The Epstein case isn't about one predator. It's about how power shields itself, how government agencies, intelligence links, and billionaires can all orbit around the same story and still walk away untouched. When Massie asked, "Will you at least look at the CIA file on Epstein?" Patel said, "If it exists." That tiny phrase, "if it exists," tells you everything. He's not saying he doesn't know, he's saying he doesn't want to know. Because acknowledging the existence of that file would mean opening a door the system has spent decades sealing shut. The hearing ended like most hearings do, with polite thank yous and procedural language. But what happened in that room echoed far beyond it. For the first time, a sitting congressman had put Epstein's powerful associates on record, under oath, in front of the nation. And the FBI director's response wasn't a denial, it was paralysis. That's why people are still asking the same question today: what are they protecting? Because if Epstein really belonged to intelligence, then his network wasn't just criminal, it was strategic. And if that's true, exposing it would threaten not just reputations but entire institutions. It would force the public to confront how much of what we call justice is theater. It's easy to dismiss that as conspiracy until you realize how many details have turned out to be true. The private calendar, the unsealed documents, the confirmed meetings with world leaders, billionaires, and spies, the same pattern of secrecy and denial every single time. And still, after all these years, no accountability, just polite hearings and perfect deflections. When Patel said, "The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information," it wasn't an invitation, it was an evasion. Because the information already exists, the victims already spoke, the files already named names. The only thing missing is the will to act. That's why this exchange matters. It's not about politics, it's about a system that protects power even when that power destroys lives. It's about a Justice Department that investigates everyone except itself. It's about victims whose voices were reduced to paperwork and whose truth was buried under the phrase "not credible." When you watch the clip, look at Patel's eyes when Massie asks if he's seen the files. That split second of hesitation says more than 1,000 pages of reports. He knows what's in there. He just can't afford to admit it. And maybe that's the real story. The cover-up isn't a single act, it's a culture of delay, of secrecy, of selective blindness. The FBI, the DOJ, the intelligence community, they all play different roles in the same performance. The illusion of accountability. But outside that room, the truth still breathes. Victims still remember, journalists still dig, citizens still ask questions, and every time someone in power tries to shut the door, another document leaks, another name surfaces, another witness speaks. That's why silence won't save them forever. Because history has a way of resurfacing what power tries to bury. It happened with Watergate, with Iran-Contra, and it will happen here too. The only question is whether people will still be watching when it does. So the next time someone says there's no credible evidence, remember this hearing. Remember the list Massie read. Remember Patel's frozen stare, and remember that credibility, in this system, is decided by the same hands that built the wall of secrecy in the first place. This isn't just about Epstein, it's about what kind of justice system America really has. One that shields the powerful, or one that serves the people. Because if truth can be hidden once, it can be hidden again. If you believe accountability shouldn't depend on who's in the photo, who's in the file, or how much money's in the bank, then stay curious, stay questioning, and don't let the silence fool you. If you're ready to see more stories that they'd rather keep in the dark, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because this isn't over, the truth always finds a way out.